Hi Claire,
Hello.
Thank you for joining me today for our latest episode of our Women Who Make It Happen series. Another one for our 2024. Would you like to start by giving us a quick introduction?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me onto the podcast.
You're welcome.
It's lovely to be here. Claire Magennis. I am the CEO of Uber Payments UK. That is the payments arm of Uber, which I'm sure you know the organisation.
Absolutely.
And we basically essentially run all payments operations for the UK. Any payments that are made in the country comes through my team. So we're quite a new team. There's quite a new kind of vibe. We're growing. We're introducing to the UK market kind of post-Brexit with some of the market changes that happened in the regulatory space. Before Uber, my career was in the risk and compliance space. I was the chief risk officer across a number of different organizations.
Yep.
And found myself at Uber for all of the great things it offers. But banking, financial services and payments is my background across predominantly the UK and Ireland.
Yeah, very good. What motivated you in the first place to join financial services? Like coming from the traditional banking environment as well, more into payments now.
I think originally my whole ethos was get a job. So when I was at university, I did business studies and I very much wanted to focus on how am I going to get employed at the end of this. I was the first person in my family to go to university.
Okay.
I have a working class background. I didn't have anyone in my family who was in financial services. It was not something that was open and accessible to me. It was not something that was discussed in my family. But when I was at university, it was an option to join the various different graduate schemes. And this was in Northern Ireland at the time. And there were a few banks there who had the schemes. And I applied and thought, let's see what happens. And I ended up going into Ulster Bank at the time, owned by NatWest now, and joined their graduate scheme. And that was my entry into financial services. Over time, that evolved into the risk and compliance space, as I've already mentioned, and then really into payments, because for me, payments are every day for everyone, right?
Yeah.
And we didn't have the payments ecosystems back then that we do now. And you can't really do anything without using your debit or your credit card or online banking or open banking, whatever it may be that you access. And for me, that was a huge area of interest and something I could learn a lot in. And that's kind of how I've ended up in that space.
Okay, really interesting. I mean, it's ever evolving, isn't it? We saw that throughout lockdown and COVID, the amount of demand for payments, especially. Yeah. Interestingly, you've talked about that shift from banking, TradFi, into more payments. What would you say your maybe key success factors are for how you manage that transition?
I think personally, it's about not fearing the change, because I think it's comfortable to stay in what you know. You know, I spent a long time in banking and I loved it, and it gave me so many opportunities, and I learned a lot in the kind of regulatory compliance space, and I felt like I knew it and I was comfortable talking about it. I was comfortable making decisions.
Excelled,
yeah. And then thinking, oh, actually that's new and I don't know a lot about it. Let's move into that. Let's think about financial crime. Let's think about, chargebacks and how you manage when things go wrong. That to me was about learning and developing. And whilst it was scary to step into that, now I look back and think, well, why did I even give it a second thought? Of course it was the right move. And I think for me, when the opportunity came up, that was for me to take that, and I did.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, your reputation precedes you. I know we know a lot of the same people.
Yeah.
So in terms of payments now, as opposed to TradFi, what shift in mentality or ability have you maybe seen as your career has progressed as well?
It's a good question. I think, the world has changed significantly. I think, pre-pandemic, there was a cash focus in society, and, kind of online banking, open banking and different payment mechanisms were being discussed. And of course, the regulation moved on to allow that. You had the kind of Payment Services Directive, which introduced the concept of, online protections and basically, moving away from that cash heavy society. And one of my previous organizations I worked in, ATMs, was a big product in that industry. And it was, huge, and the usage was enormous. But as we moved into what happened in the pandemic and the shift away from, that kind of physical transaction, and you've seen lots of places, restaurants, lots of shops all moved away from that. So it kind of expedited the movement in payments. And I think the industry has had to keep up with that.
Yeah.
I'm sure you remember going in and paying on a QR code. And that was unthinkable, maybe 4 years ago that we would have done that.
Yeah.
And that shift happened quickly. So the industry had to move. What I've seen in payments is the industry can do that. There's a lot of very creative, very talented people putting their minds to these things and thinking about how do we use some of the technology to enhance how these payments can be made? How do we make it fast? How do we make it seamless? You only need to tap your mobile phone now and you can pay for anything you want. Well, even on TfL, you get the bus and you can, that is quite new when you think about it, how far we've come as an industry. And I think in terms of mentality, and of course this is only my own experience, but I feel like there's a lot of diversity in a lot of the payments firms I've worked in. And that is on purpose, I believe. I think, they seek people who think differently.
Yep.
And, how do you kind of, maybe we're not disrupting the industry anymore because it is evolving and, it's popular and people use it. But how do you get people thinking differently and applying different mechanisms? I'm not a creative person, but some of the things I see coming through, I think these are fantastic. The innovations and the development in the tech that supports a lot of this is fantastic.
Yeah.
You pay on your watch, you pay on your phone. The opportunities are quite significant.
Yeah. And you've touched on diversity, which is part and parcel of why we run this series celebrating women in leadership, such as yourself. Diversity for you, you've said different mentalities, different backgrounds. What does that mean for you and Uber payments especially?
So for me, it's about making sure not everyone is thinking the same thing and producing the same outcome. That different opinions are valued, that it's not, we've done it this way before, so we're going to continue doing it this way in the future. Because I don't think you can be, you can't evolve with the industry. You can't do great things when you think only exclusively in the past. And I think payments firms and tech firms are fantastic at thinking about what's next. How do we evolve? How do we innovate? How do we develop? And you need different people of different backgrounds, of different lived experiences from different cultures, of different genders to come in and provide that value in my experience. We've all heard the stories of everyone who looks the same and sounds the same and went to the same school sitting around the table. Do we get the best out of that? Maybe, but I think the way things have shifted, we can see an obvious advantage in that different thought process and different people's experiences helping shape what we're delivering.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's almost celebrating the different perspectives of those different people in the room with you and trying to reach the solution with the best outcome. Yeah. So, interestingly, you've talked through a little bit about your background. You go to university, the working class background, my hat off to you. Did you have a strong female role model for you? Because I think holding the role, the mandate of CEO for Uber Payments is something to be celebrated. So who was your role model?
So I thought about this a lot, actually, and I wouldn't say I had one role model. I think it's a series of different influences in my life. So my mom went to work from I was a baby. She went out, she worked, she earned, she provided for our family. And seeing that and seeing someone who was female all those years ago doing that, for me, it was never a question that I wouldn't go to work. It was never something that I would think twice about. And I think as I then went into, financial services, and I would say that it's not about having one particular role model, but learning from lots of different leaders that I either worked for or experienced or seen. And seeing what not to do is also as important as saying what to do, I would say. There are bad behaviors, but there's also really positives. And I've learned a lot from most of those leaders that I've worked with. And I would say, in my current role, there are so many people that influence how I behave and how I kind of lead for my team. And, I've got huge support from my own line manager, their boss, and the wider organization, and I think for me, it's about making sure there are champions for you. There are people there supporting you, no matter who they are. That can be anyone. It doesn't need to be senior leadership. It can be anyone in your organization or your friend group or your family who you can go to, you can confide in, you can ask for advice, you can ask for guidance, and they'll help shape that. And for me, that's what I've tried to live with, learn from those people what to do, what not to do, get guidance, seek support, ask, how should I do that? Ask for advice, because most people are willing to help, it is what I have learned.
Yeah. And what's maybe happened in your career where you've navigated some of those challenges or alluded to bad behaviours and where you've moved away from that to make your career what it is today?
It's a good question. I think I try and think about how I feel in those scenarios, and do I want to make other people feel that way? So we know in financial services things go wrong, we expect it, we react to it, right?
Yeah.
And I think some people are obviously under pressure and they react certain ways. And sometimes I try and think in my past career, how has that made me feel, and do I want to do that to my team? And the answer is often no, I don't want to make other people feel like that.
Yeah.
And I try and change how I respond in those circumstances. So, people don't mean to do things wrong, or when things fall over, everyone feels under pressure to get that fixed. And I feel like my focus is leading calmly, that we can resolve it, that there's no blame, that we move forward and we fix things. And I try and do that when I'm supporting and coaching and leading my team. They need to feel it's an environment of trust that we can fall over, but we'll stand back up. Yeah. And I think that's really important for people, particularly if you are trying to progress in your career, if you're a female and you maybe don't see yourself in other people in your organization, the fear of failing is quite significant for some people, and it does stop people going for other roles or other opportunities. And I certainly don't want to create that in anywhere I work. And if I do, I'll call it out and change that. And similarly, if you see that from other people, change it and don't behave in those same ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. And the environment very much linked to culture. So yeah. I know I haven't asked you about this yet, but what's really important for you in developing that culture within Uber Payments now?
I think it's a mixture of different things. It's about everyone having a place in the team and everyone's voice being heard. Just because I might lead the team, it doesn't mean that my voice is more important than someone else's, because it goes back to the diversity we were talking about. We hire people because they're good at what they do, that they bring a different voice. So why would you bring them into your organization and not listen? Yeah. I don't think that works, and it doesn't make the best scenario for anyone. So for me, a culture of safety, a culture that people can feel themselves, that they can speak up, is very important, that they can confide in whoever they need to, and that I'm always there to listen if that's what's needed. But that there are cultural standards, there are behaviors expected from people, and that's what I want to cultivate in any team I'm part of, that it's okay to raise things, it's okay to disagree, and we can do that respectfully. And I think there's a really big thing, and some of my organizations have talked about this previously, but bringing yourself to work. And I think that's a big part of diversity, being able to talk about your own beliefs, your own family, your own celebrations. Yeah. That there's a place for that for everyone. It's not just one-sided, and we only celebrate one person's culture. I think, you can see a shift in the industry that we are celebrating across various different, beliefs, and I think that should be celebrated.
Yeah, I think it's conducive to that cohesion within the team. Yeah. And for sure, as CEO and enabling and allowing people to have a voice, there's going to be far more commitment and buy-in from those that work for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't mind, just touching on kind of how you got to become CEO, clearly leadership and chief exec. So what motivated you in the first place to take on more of that leadership direction?
So I'm really honest, it was not something I set out to do in my career, and
yet you're chief exec.
Yeah, so. And it's not that I don't have a plan and I don't push that, but for me, I was always in that CRO space and wanting to work in the risk and compliance space, and I absolutely loved it and still do. It's fantastic, and it's an unusual transition.
I love working within this market for our clients, especially.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and it's where everything happens, really. And so I've been doing that for a long time, and I think how I've got to where I am now, I don't tend to say no when something comes up. Like, if something looks interesting, I will get involved in it, and I'll never say, oh, that's not my job, or that's not within my remit, so I always get involved in more commercial discussions in every firm I've worked in every role I've had. And the opportunity came up in Uber, and I was really supported by my leadership to apply and to go for that role, because they thought I would be good at it, and their confidence in me supported me in going for that, which I talked about earlier. Surround yourself with people who champion you. And I think that's really important, because you might not think about these opportunities yourself, and it might not have been something you've seen yourself doing.
Absolutely.
But other people's perceptions and other people's push and nudging is also helpful to that. But I think for me, it's I wouldn't say no to opportunities if I think they would be good for me personally, and also good for my career. I am ambitious. I like to learn. I want to try new things. And we talked a little bit about fear as well. And I think, don't be afraid to do something different, because it is very different to what I previously done.
You clearly took yourself out of that comfort zone of doing something that you did so well as Chief Risk Officer.
And having to learn new things, because it's not the same role, and pick those things up and try and understand, the different side of that world. But again, people who support you, who want you to learn, will provide that environment for it, and they do. And I think that's how you can be successful. Because you can't do it alone.
Absolutely. I agree. We have very, very similar values here as well, and the ethos. Your leadership style then, we've touched a little bit on different, like allowing people to have voices and the support around one another. What's your style?
So this is always interesting, I think, and I've done a bit of research over the years on where I sit in this, because I've never really set out to define it as style. And I would say it's evolved. When I initially started out in my career, I was an individual contributor, so I would get things done and do what you need, and then you have a team, and you're trying to learn, like, what do you need to do, and it's how do you deliver through others. And for me, it has not been effective when I've dictated what people need to do and when and how. We don't hire people to do that, right? You don't hire great people to tell them how to do their jobs. So I learned that quite quickly, and I feel for me, I'm here to serve my team. They are here to, pick up what they need to do and get it done. And I'm here to help move obstacles out of their way. So probably in that servant leadership space is where I would say I am. I want to be there and be of use to them. I want to be there to listen when things are going wrong. I want to encourage them and stand behind them, pushing them forward when they're doing things right. But share the success, but also share those failures. And not be in a position where they're afraid to come and tell me, oh, something's went wrong. This has fallen over. What do we do? That we can come together, we can collaborate. And I talked earlier about everyone has a voice. And I just want that safe space and that environment for my team. And that's how I tend to lead as well. And it's effective from what I see. Not everyone's style suits everyone. So of course that needs to tweak sometimes, depending on where people are. But predominantly that is what I tend to do.
Very good. If I may ask, so you touched upon a little bit about that feeling of the fear feeling initially, or not applying for something because you didn't think it was quite right for you, or it's almost that confidence there. What advice would you give to younger talent, female talent as well? I'm sure there's many. I was in that boat who felt just I'm just not quite good enough for that, so I'm not going to apply. What advice would you give?
I think there's a few things here. I think there's a lot of societal pressure in that space, in my opinion, that, do you fit into that mold? Should you go for that role? Should you do this? And there's often a lot of quotes used to describe how a woman is versus how a man is. And I wouldn't really go with that. For me, I would say, think about what you want and go for that. Now, that's easier said than done. I know that. And again, I would say, don't be afraid to give up something you have that's good. And you might be in your job today and you're thinking, oh, it's a really good job and it's good, but actually I want something else. But what if it goes wrong? What if I fail at it? For me, I would say, don't worry about that, because if you do, and it's unlikely you will, in my experience, you can always go back to those other roles. There's always other jobs, but if there's an opportunity you really want and you feel passionate about and you go for it and maybe you don't get it, you'll learn from that process.
Yeah.
And if you do get it and it's not what you thought it would be when it turns out, you can still do something else. There's other opportunities. And I think that's the thing, there's not just one job. Yeah. And you can always go for something else and do something different. And similarly, if you're in something and it's not making you happy, why stay there?
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
You live once. I think you should try and be happy with that. And of course, we need to work and you want a job and you want a career, but you still also have to go there every day and you want that to be an enjoyable experience. And yeah, for me, I would say just don't feel that fear. And again, that's hard to do. But when you do it a few times, it's, it becomes kind of normal and it becomes what you do. Just, you don't even think about it. So this isn't a job example, but when I was initially looking in my career, early in my career, I lived in Northern Ireland and I got an opportunity to go to Scotland. I had a good job in Northern Ireland and everyone said to me, why would you leave that good job? Why would you leave all your friends and family? And I thought, that's a good question. But what if I don't take this opportunity? And what if I don't get to live in Scotland? And what if I don't try that? And my family were there, my friends, if I could always come home. Yeah. And I do, I go back regularly. But what if I didn't do that? And I always like to think that. And I switch it a little and think, what if I look back in a few years' time and regret not doing it?
It's the regret, isn't it? Yeah. I think everything you say, I completely agree with. And even working with female leaders like yourself, C-suite as well, the message that we're giving to younger talent in the industry, it's look at the reward and how much more you can reap from that, rather than just looking at the risk that's right in front of you as a short term. Yeah. Maybe look at that long term benefit. Yeah.
And it will take a few years maybe to feel that benefit. You might take a job that actually is a bit of a step back, but actually the career progression in that is better if you change industry, for instance. Yeah. But I think you have to think about 10 years time. What are you going to look back and think? And if you feel like you might regret it, then do it and see what happens.
Think of regret too. Well, just to finish off, if it's all right with you, I think if we look at we've looked at the words of advice that you'd impart on younger talent. Yeah. If you could tell your younger self anything, reflecting back, what would that be?
It would be a lot of what I've just said to you. Don't be afraid. And I've told myself that in my career, but at the start, I felt that fear and I'm not taking that opportunity. What if I don't get the job? But then I would tell myself, well, you're definitely not going to get it if you don't apply for it, so you're not moving forward if you don't do anything. Yeah. So try it and see, and try understand what are your kind of apprehensions with what you're trying to do. And that's what I would tell myself, and I do it with everything, well, what if you don't take action? What if you don't step forward? What if you don't try it? What's the outcome of that? And to that point we just discussed, looking back with regret, you want to do that. And again, that comes with age, I think, as you grow through these experiences and think, oh, that actually wasn't as bad as I thought, or that worked out and it could have been a different thing. So I try and apply that to life just generally, think about what is it you're giving up that you're trying to get to. Yeah. And often where you end up is in a much better place than where you were in my experience again. But that's what I would tell myself. And I've tried to do that throughout my career, It feels scary. You're out of your comfort zone, but that's okay.
That's where the learning and sometimes like the fun comes from.
Completely.
Most, isn't it?
And we don't know everything. And I think if you're in a position where you know absolutely everything you do and it's so easy, maybe people want to stay in that role, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you can always put yourself forward and out of that comfort zone and challenge yourself and get into those difficult scenarios where you're learning and you don't know the answer. But again, surround yourself with people who can help. And, from a work perspective, people who can help enhance you and enhance your capabilities, but also from a family and friends perspective, people who'll listen to you when you feel frustrated or it hasn't went right. And just have that network around you of people who are there to support you and champion you.
Yeah. Well, testament to you, and good luck in your role within Uber Payments. So really appreciate you coming in to see me today. So thank you for your time.
No problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you.